Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Small Biz Diaries, the podcast where we dive into the real life challenges, triumphs, and unfiltered stories of being a small business owner. Today, we have an exciting conversation with someone who truly understands the art of pivoting and adapting as a business owner, Ali Matalon. Ali is a dynamic force committed to driving Jamaica's political, economic, and social development with long-term impactful solutions. She's the founder of CorpCare. They specialize in driving sustainability solutions that transcend the industry's boundaries. The CorpCare belief is that businesses that do good do better. Ali's passion for human-centered design and policy, sharpened through her master's in public administration from Columbia University, is fueled by her mission for positive change. In today's episode, we'll explore the theme of when to pivot and how, as Ali shares her wisdom on knowing when it's time to change direction and the profound impact those decisions can have on both businesses and communities. Let's get started. Super happy to be here, as you guys know, with Ali, founder of CorpCare. Ali, welcome to Small Biz Diaries.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have our conversation about when to pivot and how just your journey with CorpCare amongst, COVID and going through all the ebbs and flows, but then just overall general lessons of adaptation and your business impact through the journey of you being a small business owner and what that has looked like for you. I'd like to start off with hearing you speak about why you started CorpCare, bring us back to where that was.
Sure. Thanks everyone for having me. Really excited to be a part of today's conversation, SP. So I founded CorpCare in 2019. Like most startups, it was a collective effort. There were a number of people really integrally involved in the startup of the business. It was on the heels of me moving back home to Jamaica after doing my master's in public administration. I'd been working and I'd gone to school in the US. And I felt very privileged to be able to return back home and start a life in Jamaica following that stint in the US. And when I first came back home, I spent a lot of time volunteering and really trying to get clear on the niche that I wanted to embed myself in the local marketplace or in the local policy space. And what I found was that, as I volunteered more, the more I engaged with organizations who needed resources and the more I liaised with organizations who had the resources. And there seemed to be this kind of mismatch in terms of corporate philanthropy and strategic giving in terms of what organizations really needed. And so at first, I felt as though there was an opportunity for corporate social responsibility strategy development. So I really thought that I could go into organizations, look at the accounting, which is really the place that you should start when you're talking about strategic giving or corporate philanthropy, and understand their patterns or the trends around their giving and figure out how to make those more impactful or to really identify themes through which they could invest their finances or their philanthropic giving more effectively, more, higher social impact per dollar spent, right? And we beta tested that idea for some time. It felt like a feasible idea at the time. We were about to onboard our first major client and COVID hit. And it just did not feel, this very much felt like a luxury service in a lot of ways, right? This was an add-on service companies were going to give regardless of whether or not we supported them with doing that strategically. We wanted them to continue giving through what we knew would be a tough time in Jamaica and regionally. It was around the world a very tough time. And it felt very hypocritical of us to encourage a business to onboard our services at a time where it was very likely that they would have to lay off employees. So I went and I worked with two other young Jamaicans and we co-founded Citizens Response Jamaica, which was a public-private partnership to deploy resources throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, at least during the height of it, locally, whether it be ventilators, testing booths, face masks, face shields, and so on, which ended up being a really successful PPP. Obviously it had an expiration date, right? It was something that all of us were really jumping in, working 12 hours a day on. We weren't being compensated for it. But it was a really meaningful thing for us to do. And, obviously those of us who were involved had the privilege to be able to give up what we were doing on a day-to-day basis to do that meaningfully. And did some other work, in and around the space, in some policy work, and then really found myself attached to this idea of marrying my policy making goals or my desire to work with and around policy with the efficiency of private sector. And that's kind of how I re-entered the world of building CorpCare anew. But that's kind of the origin story of the business. And now it's a completely different business to what I just described. And that's a part of today's conversation, right? Is how and when to pivot.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing all of that because I think it really dictates, I mean, contextually speaking, what was happening in the world and trying to balance that with your vision of what you thought everything would look like. Oh, kind of peeling back that conversation, what was going through your head mentally? Like, was there a moment of like, darn, this is not working out the way it should be? What do I need to do? Like, walk us through what those feelings were as like a founder business owner that was trying to start something. Like, was it just, hey, I gotta pivot, or was it really like a intentional feeling or sitting down session? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah. I think all of us who were involved at that point in the business just felt that this didn't make sense in the environment that we were in. And so it wasn't, how do we pivot and make CorpCare a viable business in 3 years' time or in 2 years' time or even next week? It was, we have no idea what's happening with this. We don't know if this is going to last 2 weeks. Like I remember in the beginning of COVID, everyone was like, we just need to stay at home for 2 weeks. We really didn't know what that was going to look like. And so we didn't have much strategic thinking, in hindsight, there wasn't a ton of strategy that went into us hitting the pause button. All of us were impact oriented people. We felt called to making some type of a positive shift or impact on the communities that we lived in. And so being presented with such a major potential crisis, I think we all felt like we need to be all hands on deck on that, as opposed to fleshing out an idea that we thought maybe would be viable in a more mature, stable market, right? Because I had this mentor tell me once that if you have to explain the problem to the market, you're in the wrong market.
Mm.
And I think at that time, the inception of CorpCare, we were explaining what the problem was to the market. And that's really makes it really difficult to convert sales. It wasn't a sit down type of thing. It was like, Jamaica needs anyone who has access, anyone who has resources, anyone who has network to pool those resources, access, and network together to create some meaningful impact and to create a security net for all of the healthcare workers that were going to put their lives on the line to fight this crisis.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said about even using that perspective or narrative of being impact led, like in a situation where, you're not always thinking about monetizing.
Yeah,
Instead, you're focusing on, okay, what's the problem? What do I need to focus on right now? And what does the market need? How can I serve the market that I'm trying to serve versus being like, how can I make the most money, or what service package makes the most sense, So it's almost like trying to work backwards in a sense, or at least starting with the impact and not just focusing on
for sure.
the organizational structure, monetization of that.
Yeah, and I think, in order to be successful, and there's so many different ways of defining success from an entrepreneurial perspective. For me right now, defining success is paying everyone on my team a full-time salary, right? Long-term success looks different to that, right? We want to grow, we want to have a profit margin, all of those kinds of things. But for me, I think one of the ways that you need to think about or conceptualize your business is be clear on what is the legacy that you'd like this business to leave? What is your North Star, and what will you do and not do to achieve that kind of, end result? But as part of that, be a little bit solution agnostic, right? Like you don't want to become too obsessed with the solution that you have thought about as the right one, right? Typically, the solution, I think, is closest to the problem, and the people facing the problem are going to tell you what the solution they need is. And we see that so much like in the philanthropic world or in the social impact world, where external organizations come in with big financing and big ideas around what communities need. And in fact, those communities know exactly what it is that they need. You just need to ask them. And I think if you apply that same kind of design thinking almost, right, where you start from scratch, you say, I want to meaningfully contribute in this particular space. One, what is the true problem? Two, does my solution even make sense? And how can I always be, three, solution agnostic, right? How can I always iterate on the solution that I think may be useful, or people think may be useful to garner better results, year over year, week over.
Yeah, I think there's two things that you said that stood out that I think is so important to touch upon. One of them is really how much sometimes we do attach ourselves to the like to the solution or to the narrative of what we're trying to accomplish to our detriment. Where when that doesn't come to life the way we want it to, it's almost like we get stuck mentally and emotionally on that we don't really have enough or have the mindset shift to pivot. And then two, there's a book by Seth Godin that he talks about. I think it was lens crafters or Warby Parker was going into a third world country, and they were talking about how they presented them with a bunch of options with different frames,
Mhm.
and everybody was coming to the table and didn't walk away with the glasses. They were almost too overwhelmed by the options, where they looked at glasses as like I just need them for this reason. I'm not looking for them as a luxury of like what color I'm wearing, the style. I just need them for a practicality solution. And so as soon as they pivoted, and instead of giving them options, they just gave them one lens, one frame, their sales went up substantially for impact, like in terms of people getting people to use these glasses. But it's really just understanding, like taking your perspective out of it sometimes and understanding what it is the reason for the product or the service actually is.
For sure. For sure. And I think it's really easy for us, like as entrepreneurs, to get super attached to this solution that we've created. Because I think most people, and maybe this is an assumption that I'm making as a founder, but most of us who have like an entrepreneurial bent, or like we have a founder mentality, I think it's very much a part of our identity, right? The drive that we have, it's pretty all consuming, the work that you're doing, especially when you're building a new business. I mean, I think it's something crazy like 99% of startups fail. You have to be pretty obsessed with the idea that you want to bring to life in order to do it meaningfully. And I think that that can really easily cloud our judgment. And it's really great. I've found to have people who say no to you a lot around you. I always say that the devil doesn't need an advocate, but you do want people who are, a little bit contrarian in your space to constantly be like, well, why is that different from what's already in the space? Or, today we were discussing a software idea, and one of us was pitching it and the other two were kind of shooting it down in different ways. And by the end of it, we had something that maybe felt a little bit more gritty, a little like it had a bit more legs than maybe what we started with. And I think that's but it's very uncomfortable to stay in that space, right? It's very uncomfortable to stay in the grit of it.
Hmm.
And it's not great for your ego to stay
Yeah,
there too, right? Like,
you say that. Yeah.
am I wrong? Am I wrong? I'm not suggesting like let's have imposter syndrome here, right? Like, I think it's feel confident enough in your business acumen and your entrepreneurial drive and your skill sets to challenge the solutions that you're, presenting, right?
Yeah. I think they say that some of the best ideas are the ones that people say no to right at first, right? Like, or there's people that have opposition to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Regarding what you learned pivoting that first time,
Mhm.
how do you think it helped with how CorpCare has evolved?
So what was interesting about it was like CorpCare was a little bit a dream not denied, but a dream delayed, right? And the core of us on the founding team really had other roles and had other jobs and opportunities, and we started to come back together little by little. And the team looks different today than it did in the beginning. Both myself and Dominic, who is one of our partners at CorpCare, he and I have kind of are the two that have been there from the very, very beginning, but in very different capacities, right? So he wasn't full time all the time, like in the same way I wasn't. But what I found was that when we kind of came back to the table, the goal was the same, but the business model needed to be completely different. And if anything, COVID made the business case for us, right?
Mm.
So COVID showed us the underbelly of what society looks like if private sector doesn't meaningfully invest in the communities in which they operate, and if there isn't a social safety net for people. And in developing countries, there is often a gap between what citizens actually need and what governments can meaningfully provide. And I believe it's incumbent on businesses, private sector, quasi-government organizations, private citizens to step up and start filling that gap, right? And that's a belief that I held on day one of CorpCare, and it's a belief that I hold today. The way in which we are getting there is completely different. The other thing that I found was that there just wasn't an abundance of data. So we spent a lot of time during COVID doing research. There wasn't that much data available to us. And then the other thing was, again, this notion that we were explaining to the market what the issue was that we were going to solve for them. But what are always the issues that businesses have? Lack of efficiency, high turnover rates, low profitability. Did I say inefficiencies already? Just generalized business inefficiencies, right? How can we solve those through the lens of impact? And so how can we look at that through a different lens and create greater impact by solving for some of those challenges that businesses have, right? And I think that ESG, or environmental, social, and governance, the framework, has a little bit of a branding issue in the US, but sustainability in general is a good umbrella to look at that through, particularly for businesses in small island developing states. Jamaica, I believe, is the fourth or third most vulnerable country in the world to climate change. The Caribbean, I believe, is the most vulnerable region in the world to climate change. We're seeing already the effects of, more severe weather events, earthquakes, oppressive heat. So our business leaders are feeling these changes already. Climate adaptation, mitigation, sustainability, social investment, community investment are critical to the longevity of businesses that operate in Jamaica and across the region. What frameworks are we going to use to support them in looking at what their impact is, making more of a positive impact, and in turn, improving efficiency, lowering turnover, and improving profitability, right? It is an upfront investment, but it's a problem that they speak the language of, right? And, we see where the data tells us, despite the branding issue, leveraging ESG frameworks does help to reduce those types of issues, right? I believe it reduces turnover by approximately 30% on average. Firm value increases. Investors are really driving this type of change within organizations. Publicly traded companies will soon be regulated around this. So there were lots of new pathways for us to explore. How are you spending your impact dollars alongside how are you spending your dollars generally? So the closer that we can tie sustainability factors to financial factors within an organization, likely the more impact that we're going to have, the more data that we're going to have, and the more we get to kind of our original North Star, if that all makes sense. So that really began the pivot towards leveraging frameworks like ESG, taking on board standards like IFRS S1 and S2. I can link all of these in the bio. You can learn more about it on our website. It's all, an alphabet soup worth of sustainability acronyms. But how can we leverage all of those tools, distill it down to common sense business practices, and support businesses in implementing them so that we see at the end of the day more positive impact in communities and across the environmental landscape, locally and regional.
Yeah. I want to break a couple things down for people that I think will be helpful. One is, what percentage of what you do would you say is still educating, right? Because like you said, they're, at the end of the day, some of these bigger corporations. It's okay.
I recommend all founders get a dog. It's good for sanity.
It's like a therapy dog, I'm sure. Yeah. But yeah, what percentage would you say is still part of coming and educating them about how this still breaks down from a financial standpoint and a social impact standpoint? Like, what percentage would you say still is education?
So it's huge, right? The education piece is still really big. I would say probably 50% of my week is education, 50% of my week is implementation. A unique setup, right? Because instead of having lots of smaller clients, we tend to have a few bigger clients at this stage of our growth, right? These are the clients that are already feeling the regulatory pressure from the foreign markets that they operate in. These are the clients that have, multinational partnerships. They have supply chain requirements. So they already get it, right? And they're already feeling, the push towards reporting on their business activities as they relate to sustainability, human resources, social impact, and so on. We feel that there is a huge opportunity for the region as such a vulnerable area to lead on this work, right? And so we do invest a lot of our time. We spent last week, Thursday, with a number of different business leaders and executives going through kind of what we call ESG essentials, with the private sector organization of Jamaica. A lot of those quasi-governmental organization-based entities are inviting us to come and share resources, put together toolkits for their members and really engage with different leaders. It's also a business development tool for us at the end of the day, right? Going into an entity and training their board, particularly for an initiative that is a top-down initiative. The first people that we need bought in is either the board or the C-suite. So it is a worthwhile spend of my time. I would say I likely spend a little bit more on that than the rest of my team, because I'm a little bit more sales forward than the rest of my team. We joke about creating ESG evangelists across organizations and really spreading the word about it. But really, what I want to talk to entities about is impact and sustainability. And I think if we can even help them better understand it and start thinking about it in their organization, we're still doing our job, even if they're not our client, right? Because at the end of the day, if the vision or the mission of the business is to create as much positive impact and create a society in which we feel really proud of the businesses that operate here, then you kind of want to be working yourself out of a job, right? Which is also very counterintuitive to the entrepreneurial mindset and to the for-profit business mindset. And there'll be more challenges for us to solve. It's not that I feel we'll run out of challenges to solve or we'll run out of business opportunities. It's again an opportunity to pivot if we feel that education piece is satisfied, right? The more you build up a community of people who you love working with, the more you can create really, really meaningful impact and opportunities to do more of that.
Yeah. And I think the exercise that you walked us through is a practical exercise that business owners could do, where you looked at for-profit businesses and was like, okay, what, and your customer, and what is it that drives them? What is it that really makes an impact, or is there is something that we could add value to help solve their bottom line and or things that will help affect their bottom line, etc. So it's almost like trying to understand and peel back the layers of where your business can fit based off of what helps drive their business. And I think that that's a very practical exercise that someone could do to be like, okay, if I need to adapt, if I need to pivot, what are things that business is focusing on right now, or that client or that customer is focusing on right now, and how does my product or service help fulfill those things or help them get closer to any of these things?
And I think going back to basics, right? Like one thing that we do, and we did it today, literally before this conversation, is download the business model canvas off the internet. Every other website has it.
Yeah.
Print it, or just put it on your screen, add a little text box to it, and rewrite your business in bullet points. What do you actually do? How do you deal with your customers? What is your value proposition? In order to achieve that value proposition, what are the key activities that you're doing? And for me, one of the biggest things that I spend a lot of time thinking about and working on as well is, what are those key partnerships that we can leverage to make this business stronger, to tell us when it's time to pivot, right? Who are the big players in the space as a small entity that we have not built relationships with, that we need to in order to no longer be a small entity, right? What are the resources that we need to execute on that? And then on, more of a personal note, who are the mentors that I can pull on to tell me when this is good or when this is BS, right? And can I call them? Can I set up time with them? As a leader, how do I know when to push my team to think about when it's time for us to pivot? All of those things, it's really hard to keep front of mind all the time. But I try and keep little reminders on my phone, or, keep a resource folder on my desktop, save bookmarks on Chrome, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Just to keep fresh in my mind, why are we doing this? How can we sell it a little bit differently? How can we sell it better? What little tweak can we make to our deck, to our sales, to our positioning to be a better service provider? Because at the end of the day, we provide services right now. We'd love to provide products. We'd love to productize a lot of the pieces of our business that we currently do on a service basis. But in order to productize it, you want to get to a place of really, truly understanding it and getting all the kinks out, right? So that was a long response to your original point.
No, I mean, it added to that practicality exercise, which is true. It's definitely going back to some of the basics and foundations and leaning on people when you need to. And I think that's important as a business owner and founder, because you can't do it alone as much as it you try to sometimes. You really can't. Which kind of leads me to my next question, which obviously putting adaptability aside, as the founder of CorpCare and as a business owner, what is a lesson or something that you feel has helped you going through all these ebbs and flows of where you've taken CorpCare?
I think really relying on that network of mentors and my team. I think being confident that we'll figure it out as opposed to being worried that we're not in exactly the right space. And I think, there's a degree to which my ambition or my drive makes that desire to shift a little bit easier, more palatable, right? Like, you want this thing to succeed. So therefore, if you don't feel it's succeeding in this way right now, tweak it a little bit to fit people's needs more effectively. At the end of the day, have it be successful. So I think that desire for success or that desire to really create something meaningful really pushes me to be introspective about that a lot. And I think maintaining a network of people who understand your business, who understand you, who understand your team is really helpful, a really helpful component of staying on top of that.
Yeah. And one thing that I will add, just because from an outsider's perspective looking in, I feel like you've done a really good job building your team and building a team that you trust so that way it really doesn't feel like you're alone, even though obviously there are certain responsibilities and things as founder that you need to take care of. But at the end of the day, many people on your team you trust with so many other things that help move things along. What went into the decision making process with building your team that has helped you, or even just mindset wise, like as delegating, which a lot of people have a tough time with as entrepreneurs?
I always remember this idea that a lot of investors talk about, which is a founder usually makes a pretty bad CEO. And it's true, we see it all the time, right? These massive businesses blow up and the CEO gets ousted and they, become like the chairman emeritus or they have the legacy title of being a founder. And I think about, how can I be a good CEO, not just a good founder, and how can I effectively lead a team as opposed to, drag everyone along with my ideas, right? And I think a part of that comes from in every conceptualization of this business, we have thought about it as a business that every person who would join it owns it, right? And so our legal infrastructure hasn't quite caught up with exactly where we are in terms of conceptualizing that. But I think everyone that has come into the business feels a degree of ownership over it. I think initially we really thought about it as a social enterprise and how all the employees would own the business and so on. And we're figuring out what's the best way to structure it so that that's legally the case. But I think that really helps. The other thing is very counterintuitive. The team right now are my friends, which makes it more challenging, right? In terms of giving feedback, especially critical feedback, receiving critical feedback. When a friend gives you critical feedback, it's really different to if a boss gives you critical feedback. And I think that's where the trust piece comes into play, is that, I trust you enough to give me feedback about the way in which I work without feeling as though you are commenting on who I am as a person.
Mm.
And the necessity to reinforce that when communicating feedback, right? If I'm just plainly speaking about the data behind the way that you work, right? We use our project management software. Can we look at that? How many done versus working on it versus haven't yet touched it do we have this month, right? Like, how can we be honest about that? I think helps to depersonalize it a little bit. But that's been very tricky for me because I really identify my worth with my productivity and my work, which is something that I am working on. But it's an important exercise to do. I would say that, the biggest thing for me is working with people who are just really bought in to the mission and are solution agnostic.
Yeah, I know it's
But also just are really honest, good people, with a moral compass that I can trust. It's super important who you choose to go into business with. And you have to be able to trust those people, unequivocally.
yeah. No, thank you for walking us through that, making sure people understand contextually speaking what went into all of that.
Sometimes it kind of feels like our team happened as opposed to was designed. And I think it happened because the people that are in it right now are the ones that are kind of most invested in the vision as it is today. And, we're ready to come back in when it was time to come back in. And it just evolved quite naturally to be the team that it is right now. I think what will be really interesting is when we make our first couple like external hires, like people who we haven't worked in this space with before. I think that will be really interesting, and maybe we can have a follow-up conversation about what goes into that. But it's because we know now kind of what each of us bring to the table and what we're missing. So it'll be interesting to see how we find just the missing pieces work-wise, but also the personality fit, the culture fit, and so on.
Yeah. No, it's true. There'll be a lot more things that will come with that.
For sure.
Well, I mean, I think the last question that I would love to ask that also I think will help tie everything in is, obviously I spoke to you about how Small Biz Diaries is about really peeling back the layers and trying to uncover, things that go on behind the scenes that people might not see on a day-to-day basis, the challenges, the obstacles, the mindset shifts that have to happen. So CorpCare, or just in general as an entrepreneur, what's something that you feel like you've struggled with, or that is something that you're consistently working on to help you be the best CEO, not just founder, as you can be?
Yeah, yeah. I think just finding that balance in terms of how much time do I spend working versus thinking versus relaxing. How do I disconnect kind of my worth from the entity's success? I think just figuring out what that balance looks like is a constant struggle for me. And what I realize is that there'll be some times where 2 weeks feel like 2 years, and a week feels like 2 days, right? And we have bursts of productivity, and then we have slower periods, and we have bursts of creativity, and we have slower periods, and just managing that ebb and flow so that everything still gets done and gets done to the level that you're comfortable with, right? Like, we really pride ourselves on the work that we deliver to the client needs to be of a particular quality. The client should experience a very high touch engagement with CorpCare. Excellence is kind of the bar, right? And so in delivering that to the client, can we pull back a little bit on doing something else if we need a little bit of a break? Can we ask someone else to jump in on something if we're having a tough day? Really prioritizing mental health days for our team, having lighter meetings on a Friday. Building in that balance is something that I really struggle with and feel every day I work on.
Yeah, and they always say too, like, no one's going to like specifically care as much as someone that is the founder and CEO. Like, you can't expect your employees to the level of extent that your business baby is. They're not going to fully understand. So it's
Yeah,
almost like trying to navigate that as best as possible, so that way the values are still instilled, within the business, and the beliefs and the culture, but then still also making sure that you're trying your best and they're trying their best to continue to help
for
the
sure,
business.
for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I love that. It's something I think that a lot of people probably struggle with, especially depending on where their business is at too, when once they have employees and things like that. So, um, yeah, I'm excited to see where Corp Care continues to go and grow, and especially because I think that there's so much amazing work that can be done for profit businesses that need it and can hopefully see the value in it, which I know with the educational component, you guys will do that. But anything else that comes to mind that you think you'd want to share, just in terms of like advice or something that has helped you with navigating
Yeah.
being a founder, CEO, that you want to leave people off with?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, the number one skill or the number one practice that I think has helped me professionally and personally too, you never know where these kind of connections lead, is really practicing networking. And not in a transactional way. I'm not suggesting that you need to go to these events and, ask someone for advice every single time that you meet them. Go to events, support other business owners, make connections with them, form a community, right? Go to events in which you feel like there might be a niche for your business. But I spend so much time every single week just connecting with people. And I think it is the most productive part of my week. It's something that comes quite naturally to me, just being able to walk up to anyone and talk to them and ask questions. But I see where for people that it doesn't, practicing it really is super empowering. And it's a huge part of what we do as a team, is really encourage each other to do that. If we're going on a trip, we'll be like, is there a conference we can pop into while we're on that trip? Is there someone we can go have a cup of coffee with? Is there a Jamaican connection in that market that we can tap into and see if there's space for the work that we do, right? And I find it just incredibly rewarding. I've made so many friends who are founders through it. I've gained so much mentorship through it. I've been able to offer mentorship to others through it. So I really, really encourage everyone to do that. And if it's somebody that you really want to talk to, I'd always recommend emailing them within 24 hours of meeting them, following up right away, requesting 15 minutes of their time to start instead of an hour, asking meaningful, easy asks for them to fulfill. And just keep building your little mini empire that way.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen how much business development has ended up impacting, right, your business and how your business continues to grow too. And the educational component has helped when you get into the rooms that you want to get into. So, yeah, I think that no matter what, even if you're product based, there's so many different opportunities to do that as well. But that's great advice. I don't think we've heard that one quite yet. So, I think that was perfect. But
Glad.
no, I just want to thank you once again. I appreciate it. I had such a great time with this conversation. I think there's so many different little tidbits and practical things that people can take away from this conversation is my hope. And I'll make sure to drop all of Allie's information in the description so you can check her out and connect with her. And that way we can continue these conversations and mentorship slash community in general. This won't be the last you guys will see of Allie, hopefully. And yeah, I appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you, SB. Have a wonderful day. I so appreciate it. This was a great way to start my week.
Good.
I'm just really happy to have any conversation like this. Always great to connect with fellow founders and be a part of a community like this. So thank you so, so much for having me.